Good evening. I'm David Ferriero, the Archivist of the United States, and it's a pleasure to welcome you this evening to the William G. McGowan Theater at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. for tonight's discussion, Style and Influence, First Ladies' Fashions. Whether you're here in the theater or watching on C-SPAN or YouTube, we're happy that you could join us this evening. Tonight we're here to learn about fashion and history, particularly as exemplified by American First Ladies, and we have an impressive roster of guests who will share their insights and expertise, starting with our moderator, Tim Gunn, along with Valerie Steele, Director and Chief Curator at the Museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology, Lisa Kathleen Graddy, Chief Curator of Political History and the First Ladies Collection at the National Museum of American History, and designer Tracy Reese. I want to extend our thanks to our partner for tonight's program, the White House Historical Association, and the association's new president, Stuart McLaren. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to tell you about two other programs coming up soon in this theater. On Wednesday, October 8th at 7 p.m. in a program called Courtroom Drama covering the Supreme Court, a panel of Supreme Court reporters will discuss what it's like to cover the news about the highest court in the land. And on Thursday, October 23rd at 7, Lincoln scholar Harold Holzer and Newseum journalist Frank Bond will talk about Lincoln and the power of the press, the war for public opinion. To learn more about these and all of our programs, consult our monthly catalog calendar of events. There are copies in the lobby, as well as sign-up sheets where you can receive it in the regular mail or by email. You'll also find brochures about other National Archives programs and activities. And another way to get more involved in the National Archives is to become a member of the Foundation for the National Archives. The Foundation supports all of our work in education and outreach, and there are applications for membership also in the lobby. And a little secret that I keep sharing with everyone, no one has ever been turned down for membership in the Foundation. And we have many members of the Foundation with us tonight, so welcome, a special welcome to you. I hope you've had a chance to visit our special exhibit upstairs in the Lawrence O'Brien Gallery, Making Their Mark, Stories Through Signatures. If you haven't, please come back and see it. Making Their Mark explores the many ways signatures have made a difference in American history. The items on display show us not only the actions of legendary individuals like Thomas Jefferson, John Wilkes Booth, and Katharine Hepburn, but also of ordinary people who exercise their rights to express their opinion or petition their government. One component of the exhibit looks at signature styles. Here you'll see Eisenhower's Ike jacket, FDR's cigarette holder, and appropriately for tonight's discussion, a pillbox hat worn by Jackie Kennedy, and the dress Michelle Obama wore the night her husband was elected president in 2008. The National Archives, through its presidential libraries, is the caretaker of a wealth of material about and from First Ladies since Lou Henry Hoover. In addition to their many papers, we have personal items that tell us about the women and their times. We've got hats that belong to Bess Truman, gowns from Pat Nixon, Eleanor Roosevelt's wallet, home movies shot by Lady Bird Johnson, and more shoes than you could possibly imagine. I've threatened to have a shoe exhibit, actually. Those who have filled the role of First Lady have had to meet personal and public demands. Each has brought her own passions and personality to the job, and we're fortunate to have their legacies documented in our presidential libraries. To get the conversation started, I'll turn you over now to Stuart McLaren, President of the White House Historical Association. Before coming to the association, he served as Executive Vice President for the American Village Citizenship Trust, which focused on teaching America's legacy of liberty and promoting public regard for the Constitution and America's charters of freedom. He's also served as Vice President of Mount Vernon for the Fred W. Smith National Library, Executive Director of the Ronald Reagan Centennial Celebration, Chief of Staff to President John J. Decoya at Georgetown University, Executive Vice President of Education for the Motion Picture Association of America, Manager of Public Affairs for the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and Chief of Staff to American Red Cross President Elizabeth Dole. How on earth did you do so many things? I know. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my friend, Stuart McLaren.
Thank you very much. You all are in for a very special treat tonight. And on behalf of the White House Historical Association, it's our honor to partner with our good friend, the Archivist of the United States, David Ferriero, and his colleagues here at the National Archives, who do such a tremendous job as the caretakers of some of America's greatest treasures. I'd also like to acknowledge with us here tonight very special guests, Linda Johnson Robb and her daughter Lucinda Robb, the daughter and granddaughter of one of America's great First Ladies. It's wonderful to have you here tonight. Also, very special friends and colleagues of ours, Angela Reed, the Director of the Executive Residence at the White House, and Bill Allman, the Curator at the White House, are both here with us tonight, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to work with them almost on a daily basis. Ann Stock, who is on our White House Historical Association Board of Directors, is also here tonight. The White House Historical Association was actually started by Mrs. Kennedy in 1961. As you know, Mrs. Kennedy was one of the most trend-setting and innovative First Ladies of the modern era. It was her vision with the White House Historical Association to have an organization that would promote the understanding, appreciation, and enjoyment of the White House for generations to come. And that's our job. We work very closely with our colleagues at the White House, the National Park Service, the National Archives, and others to promote the White House through education programs, books that we publish, but we also are involved in the historic preservation of the state floor of the White House and the acquisition of furnishings and art for the White House collection. We're very proud to be the private partner of the White House to do this. All of our funds are private funds, and those principally come from something that you probably know us best for, and that's the White House Christmas ornament that is produced every year. We actually have this year's ornament on display out in the lobby, and that honors President Harding. You may think, President Harding, what in the world would we talk about President Harding? There's a wonderful story and background behind this two-ornament set of two trains, and I'll leave you to figure out why two trains and President Harding. We are also working with the National Archives for an upcoming program in December on holidays in the White House, and that will be just as fascinating and wonderful as tonight's program, and I encourage you to go to our website, whitehousehistory.org, to learn more about the upcoming program on holidays at the White House, as well as the other events and things that we're involved with to support this wonderful work on behalf of White House history and to buy your 2014 White House Christmas ornament. I have to thank my colleague, Leslie Jones, who has been on point for us to bring this program together. I have a wonderful team of colleagues at the White House Historical Association, and I'd like to thank all of them who are here tonight for all that they do for us every day. You are in for a treat tonight, and I encourage you to listen and enjoy and come back for other programs that we sponsor with our friends at the National Archives in the future. It's really an honor for us to be a part of this wonderful gathering tonight. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Thank you for being here. We're going to have a rousing evening, I hope. It's certainly an interesting one and an interesting discussion. And I have to say, the whole topic of what the First Lady wears, we know is a frequent topic of discussion. And we have Lisa Kathleen Graddy here, who wrote the book on the First Lady's collection here at the Smithsonian. And Lisa Kathleen, I would speculate that you run the most visited curatorial department at the Smithsonian.
We are told it is the most visited exhibition at the Smithsonian, and at this point, the oldest. We turned 100 years old this year.
How fantastic. 100 years old.
100 years old.
That is wonderful. So I want to ask all of our panelists, why do we care so much about what the First Lady wears? What is the impact? What is the legacy? What is the message that the First Lady sends?
I think she's a symbolic figure. She's, in a way, a little bit like the Queen of America, and people look at her to see what kind of a female image she's conveying.
And I think we also see her as the mother of our country for the time that she's in office. And I think that people definitely want to emulate her and, seek guidance, from how she is conducting herself and projecting herself to the world.
And I want to remind everyone we're going to have a question and answer session at the end of this. So if you have questions about any of these things and you think you might forget, write them down. And we have Dolly Madison, who presided over the first inaugural ball in 1809. And what do we think about Dolly Madison and the impact that she had? It's taking us back.
Way back.
Way back.
Dolly Madison was
1809.
criticized. People criticized her, didn't they? And thought that she was too fancy and too much into fashion and too aristocratic, not democratic enough.
Not democratic enough, but you could come to Dolly Madison's parties as long as you were appropriately dressed. So for their time, very democratic.
But they did that at Versailles as long as you were properly dressed. So.
When you think that Dolly Madison grew up as a Quaker, so when she married James Madison, she broke from this Quaker background. So a woman who had been very demurely dressed suddenly had this ability to really just blazon out in amazing clothes. And she's very fond of reds and yellows and turbans, just maybe a nod to that Quaker cap. But she's able to fulfill this dazzling vision of what she must. You have to wonder if this is what she longed to look like as a little girl.
And there is some of Dolly Madison's dazzling red, I have to say. So Lisa Kathleen, when you say that one had to be appropriately dressed going to visit the White House, what did that mean at that time?
Well, a lot of controversy was whether you could wear boots to the White House, boots or shoes. So if you're properly shod and you're properly jacketed and can present a respectable appearance, you just need an introduction to go to Dolly Madison's White House. So if you know somebody who knows, or you have a card of introduction, then you can be admitted to Mrs. Madison's crushes. And they are so popular, they literally are called squeezes or crushes, and people crowd into her drawing room. She really begins political entertaining.
And do we believe that there's anything that is significant about the construction of clothing from this era that contributes to the overall impact that it has and the effect that it has on us, either emotionally or psychologically?
Well, it's called the Empire style because it's very high-waisted and it's worn essentially without a corset, more like a kind of proto-brassiere. And so it's completely different than 18th century aristocratic dress with a cone-shaped corset and the big hoops. It's very body conscious. It's very kind of liberating. And at the time, a lot of people in America and in France thought of it as being, a Republican style, not an aristocratic style. It evoked the idea of ancient Greece and Rome, the democracy, republics.
And compared to what preceded it, it was almost monastic, in a manner of speaking.
Well, not always, as you can see. I mean, you can have the nice plain white ones, but they also had some pretty glamorous ones. If you have a red Empire low-cut gown and a wonderful turban and jewelry and everything, you could look pretty fantastic. She was lucky for a Quaker that she got this kind of fantastic fashion.
And I'm amazed there was so much bosom exposed, at the time, especially for a Quaker and for a First Lady. But that was the style of the time.
That was the style.
That was definitely the style. So this is an example of a gown that Mrs. Madison would have worn in her youth. So this goes back to what you were describing, Valerie.
Well, except much plainer. I mean, the whole Quaker look was that you were in sort of gray and non-colors. It stood for trying to stand out of society and all of its competition, that fashion was frivolous and external. And a lot of that goes through American history, not just with the Quakers, the whole kind of puritanical sense that fashion is unnecessary and elitist. And so to be a Quaker was to make that point very clearly.
Dolly Madison also was impoverished later in her life, so she wears clothes again and again and remakes them. And this is one of the dresses we have in the collection of Dolly Madison's that has been remade over time, either by Dolly Madison herself or by a descendant, because it's a lot of our dresses are remade. It was very popular to wear great-grandmama's clothing, say to a fancy dress party or just as a remembrance. So a lot of our clothes, say the skirt will have been styled to a slightly different silhouette, or the bodice will have been changed slightly.
But we like recycling. It's environmentally
Before their
friendly.
time.
Yes, exactly. So here we have Julia Tyler. And she was indeed a great beauty. And she only held the role of First Lady for 8 months, the 8 months of John Tyler's presidency, and she was often seen wearing white satin. And what are our thoughts about Julia Tyler? And what kind of significance could she have had with such a short reign?
In 8 months, not much.
Wasn't she one of the younger first ladies as well?
She was, at that point, she was the youngest first lady, and she married the widowed president. His wife had died, and she was younger than some of his children. And there was sort of a whirlwind romance, and her father had died. She's very conscious of herself. She styled herself as the Rose of Long Island and had to be taken off to Europe by her family because she posed for an advertisement, which was just scandalous at the time. But she came back with a taste for European. So part of this look, this white satin, is that she wanted to sit on a dais and have people presented to her as at court. So she actually had a reasonable impact on White House entertaining in a short amount of time. It might not have been the impact she wanted. But the White House changes from sort of more egalitarian and Republican to a much more high style and exclusive. And she was one of the exclusive swings that swung back after they left.
I would love to ask you, Lisa Kathleen, how do you verify or corroborate these legends and tales? Is it difficult?
Some of them are difficult. So can you find a letter? Is there correspondence? Is there a diary? Dolly Madison's dress, that red dress we saw, the story, of course, is that it was made out of the red velvet drapes that she saved from the burning of the White House. And that's a wonderful story. If it's not true, it should be true.
It's not true.
Because it's a wonderful story.
Too bad. It's a great story.
The Greensboro Historical Museum owns the dress, and the DAR here in D.C. actually has a piece of the curtain, what is supposed to be the red velvet curtain. And for an exhibit at the National Portrait Gallery, the two pieces met. And because we had just gotten a really wonderful new microscope in the conservation lab, they came to our lab and they both met under the microscope to see if we could prove that this was the same fabric.
And did the fabric
It's
survive?
not the same fabric. Now, on the upside, so we know that if this was the curtain, the dress was not made of this curtain. Now, what we don't know is if that was really the curtain.
That's a very
So now we have a second mystery to solve. Was that piece that they have really a piece of the red velvet curtain?
There's another letter to be found
Somewhere.
We'll go back to Julia Tyler and on to Sarah Polk. So we are now up to 1845 to 49. And how is dressing in this particular time different? How has it evolved?
Well, this is really sort of what you think of as an early Victorian style. It's very much more conventionally feminine. You're back to the corset, you're back to a full skirt over petticoats. Although she's wearing a dark dress, you do see much more distinction between men in black suits and women in sort of lighter and more delicate colors and fabrics. So you get real gender distinction at this period. Part of the idea of women should have their domestic role at home and be really sort of different creatures than men.
And what about the relationship between fashion in America and Europe? Were we a nation of borrowers then?
Yes, absolutely. Paris was already and had been for more than 100 years the center of women's fashion. And American fashion magazines had images which were based on those from French fashion magazines. But at the same time, you have this drumbeat of complaints that how can the daughters of Puritan ancestors wear clothing designed in the wicked city of Paris? So then you have American magazines and dressmakers saying they're going to Americanize the fashion. And that often means making them a little bit simpler or a little more modest. Or it could just be boilerplate. It could be the similar dress.
So were most of these clothes actually made here?
Most of them would be made
so
here.
they were not brought over from Europe?
That would
be prohibitively expensive?
If you were wealthy, you could get
Yes.
things, but
Yes.
most things were made here. You might have fabric shipped over and then have dressmakers make it here.
I didn't realize, too, that Victorian fashion wanted, to make women look smaller. So a lot of the proportions were larger to make women look more petite. I thought that was interesting.
Well, to make your waist and your extremities, the hands and feet should be little, but the hips should be full and the bosom should be full and your shoulders should be full. And certainly by the 1850s, 60s, 70s, you wanted to have really plump, voluptuous shoulders and a big, big butt. So, but, I mean, by the 1880s, one English writer said, no man would stay long with a woman whose skinny buttocks he can hold in the palm of one hand. You know, you want a big butt.
Sounds like today. Sounds like Nicki Minaj and J-Lo, Kim K. Yeah.
Well, and this brocade gown says all that. It really
Can
does.
you imagine Kim Kardashian in that? Like,
I'd prefer not to.
Yes, your corset was the first wonder bra, pushing it up and up.
And what about these accessories? What are these? These are turbans.
that's a really cool turban.
They're
That
turbans.
one, it said Tunisian silk, right? I think that's so amazing. I think the striped one.
It is
I think what I
Tunisian
read,
silk,
right?
yes, with a tassel.
I love that. I want that.
And Sarah Polk purchased these in Paris. And did this become popular? Were people suddenly wearing turbans everywhere?
The turbans went in and out. I mean, you had them in Dolly Madison's time, and then they came back again for a little while in the 40s, 1840s.
Was this before hairdressers were popular? I asked with some sincerity.
No, it was more supposed to be a glamorous, exotic look.
It's exotic.
And here we have Harriet Lane. And she was the niece of James Buchanan. Is that correct?
She is the niece of James Buchanan. She served as his first lady, and she was considered to be just an absolute beauty, elegant member of the White House. She actually entertained the Prince of Wales and rather scandalously had gentlemen giving her presents, and her uncle had to, she used to hide things because she knew her uncle wouldn't let her accept some of the jewelry and other things that gentlemen were trying to give her.
And as the niece of the president, was she considered a first lady in standing?
She was the first lady, served as the first lady, and is really one of the first ladies to be called first lady.
Oh, that's interesting.
By the press in magazines. Dolly Madison is referred to as the first lady of our land in a eulogy, but this is the first lady in media, really. And he was unmarried his entire life. She had lived with him most of her life and served as his hostess and therefore became his first lady.
Do you think that they called upon the term first lady, the press did, because it was awkward and she's not a wife and she's not a consort and...
I like consort. She would have enjoyed that. I think partly it's to have something to call you, since you don't have a title. And Martha Washington was Lady Washington, but Lady Buchanan sounds a little odd. It's also to promote the idea that this is the first lady in the land. She is the one who will be setting fashion and who you are following. The consort, really, of the president. So in diplomatic visits, for instance, this is the woman entertaining the Prince of Wales. So you need something to give her a little more stature than Miss Buchanan.
And she seems to have had incredible style.
That is I love this dress. It drove our photographers crazy. This is a Worth gown, and it is absolutely the deepest midnight blue I've ever seen velvet, with the white satin and then the silver. And it did make our photographers insane to try and light and shoot. But it is one of my favorite pieces in the collection. I would try it on if you could secretly try it on. This would be the piece. No,
Would you ever permit that?
we fantasize, but we don't carry it out.
Well, we're moving on to Mary Todd Lincoln. And this is quite a staggering looking gown.
I will say, this is not painted from life. This was painted by her niece after her death. And when you advance this, you'll notice it's modeled on a Matthew Brady photograph.
So it's romanticized.
It is a highly romanticized.
And it
We
seems
can
like she's
appreciate
wearing that dress with that headdress.
Oh, that's a good point.
Could well be, yeah.
She may very well be. What do you think?
I think it's modeled on that photograph.
Very interesting.
Now, she also famously had a dressmaker, Elizabeth Keckley,
Oh,
who was a
yes.
well-known African-American dressmaker. And she was criticized, wasn't she, for being so interested in fashion?
Mary Lincoln, Mary Lincoln wanted to be Dolly Madison, which was absolutely who you should be modeling yourself after. And had war not broken out, she probably would have been an incredibly successful White House hostess. But a civil war happened. And so on the one hand, Mary's doing exactly the right thing, which is showing the stature and the stability of the presidency by entertaining, by dressing well, by playing this part. On the other hand, there's a war going on, and you're going to be criticized for fashion. She's also a therapy shopper, to be fair. She's in an uncomfortable situation. She doesn't have as much of her husband's time as she normally would have. She's accused of being a spy. So Elizabeth Keckley, who's also a Southerner, is someone she can absolutely relate to and becomes her confidant. So fashion is a way they can talk together and work together. It became her downfall in the end. She's actually taken out by something called the old clothes scandal, where Mary tried to sell her old clothes, which is hardly a disreputable thing to do. She was so afraid after the president's death of being impoverished that she employed Elizabeth Keckley to go with her to New York, where they were trying to be discreet, but people knew who Mrs. Lincoln was. And they stayed in a hotel where Mary Lincoln refused to stay in a room that Mrs. Keckley couldn't stay in, so they slept in the attics because the hotel wouldn't serve Mrs. Keckley, and the restaurant wouldn't serve Mrs. Keckley, so Mary wouldn't eat in a restaurant. They would have food in their room. But to find dealers who would sell Mary's clothes, and it became a 9-day wonder as all of New York came to look at Mary's clothes but would not bid on Mary's clothes, and the press was just scathing. It's actually the reason Mrs. Keckley wrote her memoir, was to try and save Mary's reputation.
And then Mary severed their relationship.
She was so disconcerted by Elizabeth Keckley, who was trying to tell good things about her, revealing secrets of the White House, that this woman who she called her best and dearest friend, they never spoke again.
Well, Mrs. Lincoln was really kind of manic depressive, wasn't she?
I think today we would say Mary probably could have benefited from a little Prozac. To be fair,
But she went through quite a bit.
She went through quite a bit. Had 2 children die, had 3 children die, and her husband die in front of her. So I can understand if she was a little depressed. But when you're talking about the décolletage, so to speak, Mary Lincoln was very fond of her shoulders. Her husband thought she was beautiful, but infamously had one dress. It's in Mrs. Keckley's memoir, where he long train and a low bodice, and he remarked that the cat had a fine tail tonight. Maybe if a little more of the tail were up by the neck, it would be a finer dress.
And this is an Elizabeth Keckley dress,
It is.
as is this. Oh, that's the back of it.
Actually, it's the bodice, 2 bodices, right?
Mm-hmm. It's 2 bodices. And is that normal?
Oh, absolutely. Many dresses
interesting.
had 2 bodices, one for evening and one for day. Because by this time, there's a real distinction. For evening, sure, plunging. But for daytime, you're all covered up. That wouldn't have been true in Dolly Madison's day. But here, it's very clear distinctions between, in the evening, you were with your social equals, theoretically, and it was all aesthetic display. It wasn't considered overtly sexual. But in the daytime, you're out with the hoi polloi, and you're all covered up.
And I have a sincere question. How much did the First Lady's wardrobe impact the reputation of the president and his administration? Was it just a sidebar?
I think it's a very easy thing to trivialize, and it's certainly not the first thing you're thinking about in a presidential administration. But Mrs. Robb said something earlier about dressing, showing your value, dressing to your value. Not showing for what you're worth.
Sell for what you're worth.
Thank you. Selling for what you're worth. And that's the First Lady's job. She is representing the administration, the style of the administration, how formal the administration is, and really the stability and value of the administration. If this is a well put together, stately, expensively dressed woman, then you can reckon that the administration is stable, has style, can entertain European dignitaries, and can stand equal with the crowned heads of Europe, which when you're trying to get somebody to come in on your side of the Civil War, when you need England to come in on your side, that's what you want to present.
Precisely. Well, let's move on to Mrs. Grover Cleveland, Frances Cleveland. And Let's see some of her style.
Was that painting in the style of Sargent or by Sargent?
I believe that one's in the style of Sargent.
And this is a Worth gown also. And it is silk Indian muslin embroidered with orange blossoms and draped with a silk tulle falling from a circlet on her hand. Valerie?
Well, this would have been the height of fashion.
Okay.
I mean, Worth was the most famous couturier in Paris. So to be his client, you would almost always travel over to Paris, go to his atelier, and he would put together a look for you. And he was the first one who took couturiers from being small-scale artisans, you know, dressmakers sewing that your hem, to being someone who was all about big business and high art. And very often he'd tell his clients, you know, I see you in yellow. And he was sort of a dictator and much mocked in the press, but he was the first hugely successful established couturier. So this is the height of fashion. You couldn't get better than this.
And when we think about fashion designers, his name is the one that pops up at the very beginning.
This is also her wedding dress.
Ah, there is her wedding, which happened in, where did it happen?
In the White House.
In the
I believe
White
in the Blue
House.
Room, if I remember correctly, and that is an absolutely fictitious drawing. It was hidden from reporters. An announcement went out that the president was going to be married. People were literally trying to peer in through the windows, which were blocked. And the artists had to come up with their rendition of what the wedding must have looked like. She was amazingly, they called her Yum Yum after the Mikado. And speculation had been that he would marry her mother. And then when asked, you know, are you getting married? He said he was waiting for his bride to grow up, and he wasn't kidding.
She was very young.
She was very young. She was 21. She graduated from college, went to Europe, came home, and married the President of the United States. She's sort of an old head on young shoulders. Very stately, very grave, very mature.
And here she is wearing what we would call a choker today around her neck. And at the time, they were calling it a dog collar. And I don't think it was a compliment.
Well, it was following Alexandra, Princess of Wales, who really helped establish that. And hers were often just sort of encrusted with diamonds. And so again, very stylish.
She's also, it's a kind of an odd, I'm sure the WCTU took comfort in it. The WCTU wanted, because of course this young First Lady is supposed to be a role model. And so they announced that Mrs. Cleveland was going to stop wearing those very low-cut bodices, which they thought was a wonderful thing. They hadn't checked with Mrs. Cleveland. Mrs. Cleveland, thank you very much, she would continue to wear what she was going to wear. So they had to take comfort in the gloves and the sleeves and the choker collar.
And here we see another example where the bodice is switched out in favor of this.
Yeah, that would be a dinner bodice with a little...
Dinner bodice, I like it. Does it also mean it expands?
No, sadly, you can see that's a corseted waist.
Yes.
And notice how the dress is made with the set bodice and a separate skirt. That's typical. You don't have many one-piece dresses then.
And actually, the piece on that is there are three bodices to this. The one it came with, which is actually the peach bodice, made in Paris. And then when they got back to America, that green bodice was made by Lottie Barton, who was a Baltimore dressmaker, and some of the width was taken out of the skirt and remodeled as yet another bodice.
I love the petticoat peeking out.
I know.
Beautiful.
That is wonderful. Back up again. Yes. All right. Now we have Mrs. Woodrow Wilson, who was in the White House from 1913 until 1921, which was a very interesting period of time for a lot of reasons.
But she looks in that first picture like it's like the whole transition in fashion happened between the first picture and the second.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes, that's true. When you look at this. So this is I guess the flapper era, Valerie.
Well, it looks like it's early 20s, like 1920, something like that.
Probably about. Well, if it's from the White House, then it's the very late teens. And she was very fond of black. So most of her clothes, aside from being a widow, a widow who married the president, most of her clothing is in black and white.
So was she forward-thinking in her taste and
I
proclivities?
find it hard to believe it's the late teens. To me, it looks like it's the early 20s,
20s?
but it's hard to tell from the little picture. I'd like to see it in person.
I wonder if it's a post-White House dress.
It could be a post-White House dress.
Well, here is another.
Oh, this is another very pretty one.
It's very pretty.
That looks teens.
That could be teens. That could be late teens.
That style reminds me of Poiré.
It does. It's got. I doubt it is a Poiré, but it has that kind of sort of ethnic, romantic feel. So nice.
Exactly.
Well, according to our notes, the label inside the jacket identifies this as a piece by Worth.
Yes. Well, Poiré had worked for Worth for a little while, but
that's
for
true.
the sons of Worth. Although when they hired him, they said, even a great restaurant needs a potato fryer, so you're in charge of the French fries. If we do the grand ball gowns, you can do the simple little
Day
frocks,
dresses,
day
yeah.
dresses. He didn't last long there.
And this is also attributed to Worth and was worn at a private dinner party at the White House in 1915.
And now, see, that's kind of retrograde for 1915. It's not at all fashionable. That's more like a 1912 looking dress, 1913. Sorry.
But the way the
This is-
bosom kind of like.
Yeah, it's really it's
Yeah.
really old-fashioned with that mono bosom, with the new high waist, the neo-empire style.
Now, I have to say that almost every dress, when we were trying to mount, this is a dress that's on exhibit right now, and we have a good amount of Edith Wilson's clothes, some that came from the National Trust and some that came from Mrs. Wilson herself, really as they were cleaning out the house in D.C. after her husband's death. But every dress we took down to the conservator. We'd choose a new one, and it'd go downstairs, and I'd get a call from Sunday Park Evans, our conservator, who'd say, "You have to come look at this. She did something to it." And Mrs. Wilson had a sewing machine and apparently liked to fiddle with her clothes, because almost every one of these pieces has been cut up or remade, and the struggle of finding a dress that was mostly intact that we could mount and didn't look as if weird. Oh, yeah, that's a good word. Was time-consuming. And this is the dress we finally came up with that she'd done the least damage to.
You see, you can keep them as historical items. At FIT, for a fashion museum, we'd be like, sorry, it's not working.
And why was she compelled to do all this tweaking?
We've been very curious, and we're still trying to find, if we can find a note that says, well, today I was bored and I remade my dinner dress from my 1915. I could speculate that she spent a lot of time alone, a lot of time with her ailing husband. Maybe she just sewed to amuse herself. She did make her own Red Cross hat, so maybe it's just a strange hobby she had. But or maybe she fancied herself as a designer and wanted to see if she could. It's sort of what we were speculating. She had an interest in fashion, and maybe she wanted to see what she could do with her clothes.
Well, if Valerie's correct, she would have been the first one out on Project Runway.
So make it work wasn't really.
Yes, she was having difficulty making it work.
Right.
So we're moving on to Grace Coolidge, Mrs. Calvin Coolidge, who was in the White House from 1923 to 1929. And this is a gorgeous
Beautiful.
painting. Very beautiful.
The president wanted her to wear a white dress, and the artist said that he wanted the composition to be red and white, and apparently the president, who liked the odd jokes, said, "Paint the dog red."
And you said that that dress was originally slit higher, right? Like with some legs showing.
We'll go back.
It was in the notes.
Apparently. This is a part of the White House Historical Association collection, not ours.
And this is a very interesting photograph. It says President Coolidge prevented Grace from wearing pants and bobbing her hair as short as she would have preferred. And he often bought her luxurious hats and gowns to wear to public events. And what's interesting about this photograph, we were looking at it earlier, it is in the White House. It's a staircase that no longer exists. It's been removed. And I hope not because of what she was wearing. And this is quite beautiful.
This is beautiful.
It's
This is
beaded
a real
down.
little flapper dress from 25 or 26. That's a perfect little flapper dress. See how heavily beaded it is. You have to,
It's interesting how much of that cami sticks out at the armhole.
Well, if you get normally an arm would be there, so I think it helps. He was a notorious cheapskate, and this was his one extravagance, was to buy his wife clothes or to come home and say, I saw this thing and you absolutely must have it. He thought she was beautiful, doted on her, and didn't want her to wear the same thing twice.
Wow.
And did she like the president's taste?
She seems to have. She was very subservient isn't the right word, but she knew what he liked, and these were not the battles she was going to choose a lot of the time. She also had a sewing machine and quietly also ran up some of her own clothes at the same time.
We have to banish all those home machines.
But
I think everybody sewed.
we could have the
Tim.
entire collection of White House
My
sewing
grandmother
machines.
did.
She did have an interest in appearing. She liked casual clothes. She
Well,
liked
the
some of
pants
the
that
sort
she
of
liked.
sportswear that was coming out at the time. So if you see a lot of candid pictures of her, you can see a much more casual look.
And she was an avid animal lover. So it begs the question, what is she doing with that raccoon?
That's Rebecca. This is Rebecca the raccoon.
Did it become a collar? Did poor Rebecca
Oh.
end up on a coat?
The temptation to say yes, Eleanor Roosevelt. There was always that
That's true.
that fox.
And here we have Eleanor Roosevelt, who was in the White House for a very long time, 1933 until 1945. And this is her silk crepe evening gown for the 1933 inaugural ball.
I read that the sleeves were removable. Oh, I see where. Up here.
They are. We have it on display now with the sleeves off because that's the way she wore it.
Oh, it is
The
how she
photograph is, and they're wonderful little moonstone clasps that you at the shoulders that you can take it off. My favorite part though is because it's not an Eleanor Roosevelt. You don't think Eleanor Roosevelt and think slinky, but the back fastens with a small clasp, and if you take the sleeves off, you can also open up the back and have it come down, and so you get a nice draped low back.
Oh.
And it's just such it's a wonderful, it's very movie star to me,
Well,
very
the
30s movie,
30s,
yeah.
such a wonderful, such a sexy, stylish decade.
But you don't think of Eleanor Roosevelt and like
No.
sexy.
No.
It's true, you don't.
No.
Yeah. She was a bit of a minx. And Christmas greetings from the President and Mrs. Roosevelt. It's hard to tell what either one of them is wearing, except that it's white. And this is a lawn party for White House guards. Well, that was very democratic in its own way.
And the suit on the, let's see what's behind me, on the right is actually it's a dress. It always looks like a suit to me, but it's a dress, and this is what she wore to the first inaugural ceremony.
Oh, interesting.
So it's a beautiful, they called it Eleanor Blue, and it's a sort of lavender color, and
interesting.
it was Eleanor Blue. And oddly, we have the hat that's supposed to go with it in the collection, made out of the same fabric, but she didn't wear it. I'd love to know why.
What was the fabric?
It's a velvet, so it's a beautiful sort of shimmery lavender. I'd wear it for a wedding personally. Lavender velvet with a matching hat with little flowers toward the back.
I think she looks better with the contrast.
So it wasn't uncommon at all for first ladies to recycle looks and wear things numerous times.
Yes, you wear your clothes again, especially during a depression, during a war, but
absolutely.
you also, it's something you can say to show that you are not as extravagant as people might think that you might be, and the press will note if you're wearing something again. And depending upon the event, the press, and how popular you are, you're either going to get credit for that, or it's going to be a detriment, and people are going to remark that you're not supporting the fashion industry enough, that you're not buying enough new clothing, that you're not giving a good impression of the United States. You can't win. You cannot win
very
when you're
difficult.
first lady with your clothes.
And these were serious war years. It was especially difficult. You didn't want to step up and out. Now we have Mrs. Dwight D. Eisenhower in the White House from 1953 until 1961. And what did we think about Mrs. Eisenhower's style?
Very 50s.
Very.
Quintessentially 50s. Pretty in pink, big poofy skirts.
One of the most popular with little girls who visit the collection. You can't beat the fairy tale pink princess dress.
Well, that we see right here. Most definitely. Certainly is bedazzled. So, Valerie, do you think that Mrs. Eisenhower was able to attain the style because she could purchase it, or do you think it was embedded in her? And Lisa, Kathleen, I'm asking you the same.
Well, it's of the period, so in that sense, it's fashionable. But it's by no means cutting edge fashion.
No.
This is it's sort of Anne Fogarty. It's not Dior.
She loves clothes, but Mamie Eisenhower will tell you herself she will buy, this is by Nettie Rosenstein.
Yes.
So she will go to a designer, or she will buy it from a mail order catalog. Whatever she thinks is pretty is what interests her. And also that doesn't look old. Mamie Eisenhower was very concerned that she not look old lady-ish. So she wanted things, and this dress to me is a really good example of something that she made her feel young, in which she appeared young.
And here is another of
Yeah,
Mrs. Eisenhower's
more pink.
gowns.
Which comes with matching shoes, a matching purse, and frightening opera-length matching gloves. That is more magenta than you have ever seen in your life.
Oh, dear.
The 50s could be sublime, or it could just be frightening.
So when they said you had the Mamie look, was that a put down or was that a compliment?
At the time, it's almost always a compliment, I think, that you're dressing like the first, that you're Mamie pink. Every first lady seems to have a color. That you're wearing Mamie pink, or that you're wearing something that would be very popular in the White House. You'd certainly catch the first lady's eye if you're dressed like her. So if you're going to an event at the White House, it can't hurt to be wearing something that Mamie Eisenhower is going to like.
And everybody, pink was a really popular color then. That's sort of really a think pink. Again, sort of femininity, the feminine mystique. That was the period. I think a lot of people could identify with her and her clothes, and that would make it popular.
Yes, most definitely. And I love the caption to this photo. It says, "Mamie enjoyed a good bargain."
Bragged on her mail order hat.
And this is interesting. Lisa, Kathleen, can you tell us about this textile?
This actually is not a piece of our
it's not, I'm sorry.
collection, but it is a toile, and it shows scenes in their life. So it's Gettysburg, the house in Gettysburg, and other places that they've visited and been. So it's really sort of kind of like you make a quilt would be the story of your life. This fabric, in a little way, is sort of a scrapbook of the Eisenhowers.
Do we know where this dress is?
I do not know where this dress is. I'm going to assume that it is in the Presidential Library System.
All right. Because the toile is really...
And Jim Gardner, the head of the Presidential Library System, just went, maybe?
Moving on to Mrs. Kennedy, who was, we all know, a style setter and someone people followed very, very, very carefully. What was it about Mrs. Kennedy's style?
It seemed aristocratic.
And I think it was very much a kind of upper class style, which went from Eastern Seaboard right across to Europe. So it was a look which, for a lot of Americans, I think was strikingly chic. I think other people in her milieu just thought these were the nice clothes that but one wore, But for the average American, it was sort of the first sight of a first lady wearing this sort of very chic clothing.
So was it a glimpse inside a very rarefied universe?
I think so. I think that would be fair to say.
But it always seemed to me that it's a style you can look at and think might be achievable for you. You can imagine buying
And she
that
had
dress
huge
or
impact
knock-up.
that way.
Yes.
Everybody, Women's Wear Daily covered her just like a war. Everything she did,
Yes.
they were covering. And the general public as well was fascinated.
It did start a whole. I love this picture. It's Jackie in a strapless dress, and I remember we have. In the collection, we have a sleeveless dress, we have a one-shouldered dress, and we have a strapless dress. Then we have a cocktail dress with a jacket. And I remember reading that there was concern over Mrs. Kennedy's shoulders and whether they could be seen. And Ole Cassini talked about having to convince the president that this was okay. And so they moved from that inaugural gown that's a sleeveless dress but with an overlay of chiffon to a one-shouldered dress for her first state dinner gown, designed by Cassini, to eventually these strapless dresses. And they found out that the public liked Mrs. Kennedy's shoulders just fine.
Good.
I was amazed when I read that he really didn't want her wearing the strapless gowns.
It's always part of that continual problem. What is the public going to say about what you're going to wear, and is it appropriate? You belong to us. You're the first lady. Is what you're wearing appropriate? Lord knows we all have opinions on people's clothes. But you look at it now, and it continues. Can Mrs. Obama wear a cardigan to meet the Queen?
Yes.
Right.
And can she wear shorts and sneakers in the Grand Canyon? Well, what would you wear in the Grand Canyon?
A ball gown.
It's
It's true. I just want to make one comment. This is the President and Mrs. Kennedy with the cultural attaché from France. They're at the National Gallery of Art here. The Mona Lisa is visiting. It's what year is it? At any rate, all that I will say is as a kid, I remember standing in line to see the Mona Lisa, and it was well worth it. And this is a beautiful dress. This is Oleg Cassini, 1961. Yellow silk. And so the black and white photograph is of the look that you see in color, but the bodice is switched out because the bodice
Switching bodices.
still switching them. Yes, the bodice in the black and white photograph is dark.
Yeah, it was dark green, the original bodice. It was switched out for the pink.
Do we know why? Does it matter? It doesn't even matter. Matter of taste? She changed her mind.
idea.
At least she didn't sew it up.
Can you imagine Jackie O? Like,
No love no.
All right. We're moving on to Mrs. Richard Nixon, 1969 to 1974. And it was maintained that Mrs. Nixon represented the average woman. What do we think about
who
that?
put that forth? Was it the...
I think they just purposely, Nixon knew even winning, he wasn't the most popular of individuals. And when he had campaigned in '60, he actually said, whatever you think of me, we all can agree that Pat would be a wonderful first lady. It's like, it's just such an odd thing to say. But was a lovely woman, a friendly woman who wasn't used nearly to the effect that she could have been by the White House, because they just didn't understand her charm and the value and the power that she had. So they trotted her out as a symbol of the average housewife and sort of tried to mold her into this look or this image of this, she's just like you.
Well, and you think of when Nixon talked about her Republican cloth coat, that she was not the kind of person who was in a fancy fur coat. And then you compare that to all of the reports about Mrs. Kennedy shopping and spending tens of thousands of dollars, so that Mrs. Kennedy said, I would have had to buy sable underwear to spend that much money. And you have two very different images in the public of two first ladies.
Which is, again, how you can use the First Lady and her fashion to promote the presidency, to promote your candidacy, and to create a very particular image for your White House.
And these are images of Mrs. Nixon in clothing that we're used to seeing her in. It was a kind of uniform. How would we describe it?
It all kind of reminds me of the Queen in a way, sort of one monochromatic, one color, so that you can pick her out in a crowd. You came to see this lady, so she wants you to be able to see her. That's part of what she's doing, is being visible for you.
Yeah. And it's unexceptionable. I mean, it's perfectly fine, but it's not fashionable. It's a kind of ceremonial uniform. I think that's really a good idea.
It has dignity.
I was asked once if did first ladies aim to be sexy? And after I sort of choked for a minute, no, I think they aim to be appropriate. Right. And Mrs. Nixon really embodies that look of an appropriate first lady for your age, for your station, for the activity in which you're involved. You aim to be appropriate.
Unfortunately, with
June
the
Carter
coming of
Cash.
the 1970s, even an appropriate dresser looks a little odd, and it's very easy for other people to look extremely outre.
I love June Carter Cash. Just like the chiffon is like rolling in and out of these holes.
The decade the taste forgot.
And it's on its way back.
Oh, yes.
We have
Again.
in the collection, it fascinates me because I never think of an evening gown as having a front zipper. But Betty Ford's state dinner dress, of course, there is no inaugural gown for Betty Ford, so she's the only first lady that got to choose something to send to us. And then she chose a dress she'd worn to several state dinners, and it's her favorite shade of green. And it was made by Frankie Welch, an Alexandria designer. But it has a zipper in the front, and it still fascinates me. I don't think I've ever, any other time, seen. So I would ask you, is that really odd?
What was the date of the gown?
I'm going to say 1974.
In the 40s, I think there were front zippers.
Yeah,
and
you were
zippers were used
experimenting
more
with
for
zippers.
adornment.
It's not unheard of for them.
It's a beautiful, lovely dress.
At least
but
it's beautiful. And here is a close-up of Mrs. Nixon's inaugural gown, one of them. Is that correct?
This is her first inaugural
Okay.
gown. And I have to say, this is one of the pieces we were surprised to find displays so much better since we've redone the mannequins. The sparkle on this bolero. It's a very simple dress with just this this jeweled belt and bolero jacket, and it has the most amazing shimmer to it. Any way she turned or moved, it just must have been this beautiful glitter. And a series of dresses in this time period. It's interesting, yellow, when we put them all together, you realize yellow was very popular for a while. We have a series of dresses that are pastel yellow, pastel blue, pastel green, and then you move to the other side, and suddenly we have the Nancy Reagan white, and then vivid blue, purple, vivid red, and then back to white again. So it's we have an interesting rainbow going on.
Interesting. Well, we are going to move on to Mrs. Ronald Reagan in the White House from 1981 to 1989. And this is my least favorite fashion decade, I have to say.
Well, one thing you have to notice with this is how Mrs. Reagan, I would think, almost single-handedly transformed red from being the color of communist revolution to the color of Republicans. So all these men wearing red ties owe a debt to Mrs. Reagan for transforming the symbolism of this color.
That's a powerful
That's a
operation.
very powerful
To
operation.
have succeeded.
And a wonderful example of fashion really reshaping the image of the White House, because you moved from the Carters, who had this very the White House is never going to be casual, but a much more casual, even their inaugural balls were called parties, not balls, but a much more casual, entertaining style, a purposefully more casual look. And then when the Reagans were elected, all of the pre-speculation is on the Hollywood glamour that will come in Mrs. Reagan's designer clothes, and what will the new style of the White House be? And that was a white tie inaugural ball, the first one since the Eisenhowers, and just a much more formal White House. So we really do look to her clothes for indicators of what the administration will be like.
That is a powerful role to have. And she wears a lot of Adolfo.
Yes.
Her good
And
friend.
Galanos.
And Galanos.
James Galanos.
In fact, this is Galanos.
Yes.
The last two were Adolfo.
But there was a scandal, too, about her accepting designer clothes as gifts, was there
Forgot
not?
about that.
Yeah, were they gifts, and if they were, how were they declared, and what are they paid for? I mean, it's always, but she came from a world where
Yes,
this
where
is
that
normal.
was fun. You got, of course, in Hollywood, you get swag
all the time, and how to translate that into Washington life, which is just such a very, very different thing. And a few bumps in the road. Fascinating closet, though. Everything has a tag, and she recorded when she wore when she wore this dress, to what function she wore this dress, the date on which she wore this dress, and everything is tagged so that you can tell, because she does rewear clothes, you can tell when in rotation it had been. On the sentimental,
That's a sign of a
That's a good
person who's
system.
really interested in
clothes.
clothes and in her wardrobe.
Right. And how she presents herself.
yes, that
So
much
maybe she
attention.
wouldn't greet the same person twice in the same dress.
It's actually very thoughtful. I think.
Tim,
I don't
I
want
think,
you to-
I think you had that tie on last time
I
I saw
probably
you.
Yeah, can't you get another tie?
I know,
It's the same one
exactly.
over and over.
I think he only owns one. And you might. That might be your perception, absolutely. I'm going to start labeling my clothes.
On the sentimental side, though, and I was like, Rosalynn Carter took a lot of guff for wearing a dress for an inaugural that she had worn for Jimmy Carter's gubernatorial ball, and it was a very sweetly sentimental choice. Mrs. Reagan, who has this beautiful, and it is a gorgeous dress, beautiful galanos dress, truthfully, it's also a rather sentimental journey because he had made the gown for Ronald Reagan's gubernatorial inaugural ball, one-shouldered, white wool decorated. So I think Mrs. Reagan was also making a little bit of a sentimental journey in this.
But it's a little bit
wonderful
different
way.
if you hire one of America's greatest
True.
couturiers to make another masterpiece.
True.
Or you pull it out of the closet and walk it out again.
And here Mrs. Reagan is in another Adolfo suit.
You wonder why wasn't Chanel suing at that point?
Well, as you know, here we can copy everybody and it's perfectly illegal. No, it's true. I mean, all this inspiration from Europe, I spent a lot of time, and Tracy, you probably did too, on Capitol Hill advocating for the Design Piracy Prohibition Act because fashion designers in this nation do not own their intellectual property. And it's largely because we were a nation of copiers. There was no incentive to have such laws in place.
Right.
So we can rip people off right and left, and it's perfectly legal.
It is for many people would like to have intellectual property rights.
Yes.
There are like 10 times more who don't want to go down that road
That's true.
because it would hurt their business.
So we're moving on to Mrs. Clinton. And how would we describe Mrs. Clinton's style? I'm moving on to a dress.
The famous pantsuit and the hair problems.
And I think at the heart of it, I just feel like it's not important to her, you know what I mean? I think public service is very important to her.
Yes.
But her appearance is like, it's down on the list. She's
But I have
got
to
a lot
say-
of things to do today.
Mrs. Clinton is looking very presidential these days.
She is.
There's definitely an evolution that's been taking place, and the bar has been raised.
Since she got to be friends with Oscar and Donna.
At least she's taking
Upgraded
notice.
a little bit. I think Mrs. Clinton is also, and this is a problem Rosalind Carter had, it comes as a surprise and a bit of a shock that people are this interested in your clothes and take such a intense interest in your clothes, or that part of your job was going to be to promote American fashion. The idea is just if I do good work, you should be looking at that. But it is a part of the First Lady's job to promote the American fashion industry, to promote American looks, and to be a kind of billboard for, a large part of our economy. And no one tells you that when you're coming in until you start finding out that you're supposed to have these particular looks. And it's a very valid thing for the First Lady to be doing. Just as you're an emissary for other things, you should be an emissary for American fashion.
Well, also, I am always talking about the semiotics of clothes. The clothes we wear send a message about how the world perceives us, whomever we happen to be. And in the work that I've done on Capitol Hill, having elected individuals run from me saying, I don't want you to judge me, I didn't know you were going to be here. and my response is, I'm never going to judge you providing you accept responsibility for how you're presenting yourself to the world. So if you choose to run on your own account, but not on mine.
Well, and two, you have to think, Mrs. Clinton was a lawyer. Lawyers are not the best dressed socioeconomic group in America. They're notoriously sort of very conservative. It's very kind of frumpy. That's why people who think fashion's all about money, if you think, take a group of lawyers, now take a group of hairdressers. Which one's better dressed? It's the hairdressers, because they're interested in fashion, and the lawyers mostly aren't, except when it's important for your client. And they'll say, okay, you're going to dress to impress the jury. And you're thinking that way, a lot of careful thought. And I think Mrs. Clinton slowly started to learn that, in a way, the American public was like a jury, that they were looking and they were judging.
Absolutely. So now we have Mrs. Bush, and let's move to her style here. Seen also with Nancy Reagan. So what would we like to say about Mrs. Bush's style?
Well, Laura
This
Bush
is
was
Laura Bush.
apparently not very interested in fashion, unlike Barbara Bush, who was very interested in fashion. We think of Barbara Bush as looking like a granny with her little fake pearls and stuff, but she was really good friends with Skazi and had lots of very fancy dresses. Whereas Laura Bush doesn't seem to have been particularly interested. I mean, she wanted to look appropriate and everything, but it wasn't an interest of hers.
I just always think of her as being so mild, and when you see photos of her, she's wearing soft colors, and it's relatively demure, nothing that's going to shout out, because I think she just has a very gentle, mild presence.
No fake cowboy looking like he sometimes would put on.
There was an interesting color shift, though, that went on, because she was very taupe and sort of beige when they were running, and when she came in and this beautiful red dress. And Michael Faircloth tells a wonderful story about coming actually to see the First Lady's exhibit, that Mrs. Bush had asked him to come look at the exhibition and see what color hadn't been used recently so that they didn't repeat a color. And he says that he didn't see red, and red was a favorite color of his, and it's a gorgeous color on her. And so he designed this beautiful, sparkly, crimson dress, ruby red dress. And as time went on, you notice Mrs. Bush wearing more color and beautiful deep colors, which are beautiful on her. But I think when you see pictures of yourself that much, you start to see how everyone else is seeing you, and you can start to look at yourself in these settings and maybe adjust a little bit.
But you do also see her turning away from him as sort of regional designers to national designers.
There does seem to be a trend that your first designer is maybe somebody from home or somebody you've known, and the second designer, at least for the inaugural gown, the second designer is a name that everyone recognizes. And I don't know what lessons learned are from that, but you've come to know that this is
well, at least
the
for
second
a couple
design.
of them. I mean, for Clinton, for Bush, but I don't think for that many. I'm not sure we can draw a moral from it.
No,
yet.
I think maybe you just learned your first one might not have been as successful as you wanted. Actually, I think Mrs. Obama is the only one, maybe Eisenhower, who used the same designer twice. You have to think about that, but for both inaugural gowns.
Here we have the divine Mrs. Obama. I have my biases, I have to say. And Tracy, you have dressed our current First Lady.
It's been my honor, yeah.
A number of times. And
Yeah.
What's your sense of Mrs. Obama's style?
You know what? I feel like she's just purely an individual who wears what she likes and knows looks good on her. I think she isn't looking really so much to the past to see how First Ladies have dressed and should dress. She's really a woman of the moment. And I think it's very pure and natural how she presents herself. And when you meet her and speak with her, that's what you get. You get this realness. Mm-hmm. And I think for the presidency and for their impact on the world and the country, I think they want to present this realness.
And it's sincere, don't you believe?
Yeah, it very much is.
I think she's had a huge impact on the fashion industry. Not so much perhaps on the average American woman, though I think the right to bear arms struck a note with a lot of people.
Yes.
But I think that for the fashion industry, it's been super important. Jason Wu's career would be nowhere if she hadn't worn those inaugural gowns. It was really good for all of those designers. And she did kind of spread the wealth around. She would have different designers doing dresses, and I think it helped a lot of them.
And she didn't just go to established designers.
Yeah, exactly.
She went to a lot of new, younger designers or slightly more obscure designers. And she also wears a lot of affordable clothing,
yes,
which
it's
is
accessible.
Amazing. And I think that people love to see her wearing something that they can afford to buy.
And they do say if she's wearing something, they say it's J. Crew, or that it will be sold out. It's what they
Right,
in
it's true.
England, it's the Kate effect, and it will be gone the next day.
There are dresses of ours that she's worn that just in stores call, and I have certain stores that are like, please let us know if you know what she's going to wear, because then we'll order more. And you can't predict, because they don't call you up the day before, the month before, and say she's going to wear this on this date. Produce a few extra, 100 or 1,000 dresses.
Did you know that I have to say, I think the dress that you designed that she wore at the Democratic Convention it's beautiful. It's one of my, I've told Jim I covet that dress.
Thank you.
For the collection. Did you know she was going to wear that?
I did not. We got a phone call, a few weeks in advance saying she had a special engagement, and you know, if we had some ideas of something that, you know, might be appropriate or that she might like, to send them down. And I'm sure that they called several people the same, but they did not say what it was for. I think it's the next slide. And we had no idea. And literally, the DNC, the convention was on an evening when we were working. We were at the office because it was Fashion Week.
Yes.
And a slow period for you.
Slow period. And she came on like after 10 p.m. and our controller called. She was home and she was like, "Mrs. Obama's wearing that dress." And we're like, you know, everybody, like, we had to stream it on the computers, but we had no idea until she walked out on stage. And the funny thing with this dress is we had put sleeves on it. No, because they literally said, you know, she doesn't want the emphasis to be on her arms. It's an important engagement. So we're like, okay, this is the original style, is sleeveless, and we put sleeves on it because we thought she might need them, and they removed them because it just looks better without. And she looked amazing, you know, and like, why cover those up?
I know. So I have to ask you, what's it like to have the First Lady wear your own creations?
I can't really define it because she's someone that I admire greatly. Having met her and been able to speak with her, even more so. It's not just someone out there that you're wondering about. It's someone that you've had the pleasure of getting to know, and I just respect her tremendously. And she wears clothes beautifully, and I think she's someone people are always excited to see.
Yes.
I mean, it's funny when Mr. Obama was running for presidency the first time. There was a fundraiser thrown in New York, and Anna Wintour was one of the hosts, and Andre Leon Talley, and this list of, you know, fashion luminaries, and it was at a gallery in Chelsea, and, you know, we get there and it's this all white room, and, you know, and you have to shake Anna Wintour's hand, and it's like, okay. And Mrs. Obama gave a speech, and it was a very personal speech, and everyone was just getting more and more excited. And, you know, she was looking at everyone in the crowd. She makes eye contact, and she looked directly at me, and then she looked back, and, you know, she's speaking, and I'm looking behind me like, who's she looking at? You know,
She's looking at you.
At the end of the speech, we had the opportunity to meet her, but all of these fancy designers bum rushed the stage. It was hilarious. People, you know, shouldering each other out and pushing and shoving, and I was like, where am I? Who are these people? You know, but that's how everybody was jockeying for position and for some kind of favor, and, you know, to touch her arm. And it was interesting to see the fashion flock, you know, kind of get crazy, because fashion flock is a tough crowd, really tough crowd, but she won everybody over immediately.
She is so capable of that.
Yeah.
Let's open the floor to questions. And do we have 2 mics? One on each side. And we would like very much for you to rise and go to the mic, because we want everyone in the audience to hear your question.
Hello.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. And obviously we were at the archives and we've been looking back at sort of the history of First Lady fashion, but we're living in an age where we might actually see the first woman president. And so I was wondering if you all might like to speculate about what presidential lady fashion might look like.
Well, there's certainly been a number of female leaders around the world now. So we've seen a variety of different styles. And I think that it's going to depend a lot on the particular person. Yeah. If it's Hillary Clinton, I think that what she evolved into over the course of the last 20 years or so is probably going to be something like what you'll see. Someone who was initially not particularly interested in fashion, but who began to understand more about how it can work and got to be friends with some fashion designers, and who accepts that it has a role in how people view you because she is a supremely intelligent woman. So I would assume that it would have something of a role, but probably not as much as if it were someone like Michelle Obama, who I feel has a more natural sort of love of fashion, a more sort of experimental feeling. And there, I think that some of the same rules would apply, that the clothing would have to seem to be appropriate, powerful, and yet also somehow womanly, maybe not feminine in the Mamie Eisenhower sense, but not, so you don't want to look like an imitation man.
Right. I also think that now is such a wonderful time for women in business. I mean, we have so much more choice. There's so much less that is dictated to us, and I think there's power in being sexy. There's, you know, I'm not saying overtly sexy, but there's power in it, and women are starting to feel that and use it more. So it'd be interesting to see, you know, what could transpire.
And I'm always saying there are profound differences in the two genders, and show them off.
Work it.
Yeah.
Nothing else, it would be amazing to see color at a presidential press conference.
It's true.
You first.
Hello.
I think we've shown tonight that it's fun to laugh at first ladies for their fashion mistakes, and that critics have been doing it for a few hundred years. But I think it becomes more problematic when you think about the implications it has on gender equality. And I think it's been interesting in the past few months especially to look at how people have been criticizing Mr. Obama's fashion. His summer suit got a lot of press recently. And I was wondering if you thought that that indicated something about gender equality when it comes to fashion, that everyone's an equal target now.
I think that more and more that's becoming the case. If you look at something like Women's Wear Daily, which is sort of the Bible for the fashion industry, they regularly rate men. And they don't do it with women, they only do it with men. And they grade them. And they are harsh graders, so it's like C-. And they will detail everything from the haircut to the collar to the pants being too long to the shoes being long. So I think very much we're becoming more and more of a visually literate society. And I think people are looking at men's clothes as well as women's clothes now more than they ever were before, or more than they've been for a long time.
And I will add, men have escaped the criticism, and it's high time that they come under the microscope as well. It's true.
Also, when you think about it, these are not people who, they didn't go into their business because they were interested in fashion. So it is, you have to feel sorry for people in a way who were thrust into, they've chosen to be in this limelight. But it's like the lawyers. This wasn't what they were expecting. And again, it's always a shock, I think, especially for the men, to find out that people are going to critique what they're wearing. You know, the president's dad jeans, or you know, a badly cut suit. Yeah, badly cut suit.
They should be criticized.
This is just not what they thought they were going to be graded on when they got into this game.
But there will be no improvement without criticism.
This is true.
That's true.
Right? And on that note, though, too, I was at a gala last week, and there were so many senior gentlemen who were wearing tuxedos from 1980.
Oh.
And I think there should be a rule.
Yeah. Give it up. Retire that.
At least every 10 years. Update your tux. If your shoulders are out to here and it's sagging and your pants are very full and breaking, it's time.
It is definitely time. Time for an incinerator.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And women will appreciate it.
Tracy, a huge fan of your designs.
Thank you.
In the future, will we see more designs where you'll switch out a bodice for us? Make our outfits convertible?
I like the idea, actually, you know. But two-piece dressing is trending. And we call that, you know, having a top and skirt in the same print or fabric. So it's actually kind of trending. So we can switch out some bodices sooner than you might think.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question, though, Tracy, on that topic? Does it help with fit when you have two pieces as opposed to one?
It does, because hardly any woman is the same size up and down. I'm like 2 sizes larger on the bottom than I am on the top. And I think a lot of people have that issue. Either they're bigger on top or bigger on the bottom. And it's incredible that anything fits. You know, we work really hard on it, and you put stretch in things, and you know, try different silhouettes that might be more flexible. But you know, no two women are the same size. There are a few. My fit model is the same size up and down, you know, and that's her
why she's your
job,
fit
and she
model.
keeps it that way, yeah.
Right.
But I think most women are different sizes, up and down.
Do we have only 2 people with questions? Come up.
I could just stand. I'm loud. So we've talked about the nation being...
Oh, you know why? Because this is being taped for the National Archives. We have to have your voice.
Well, now I'm really nervous.
Don't be.
Hello, C-SPAN. I have a question, all 12 of you, about your remarks about us being a nation of copycats traditionally. Given that American design is so resurgent right now, do you think First Lady should be making a commitment to only wearing American-made clothes and American designers?
What do we think?
I think that it's good if First Ladies can favor American designers, and a range of them, like Mrs. Obama, not just the famous ones who don't need her help. But I do think that having a kind of litmus test where you say if you wear any foreign design, that's not playing fair. I think that's infringing on her freedom as a woman and as an individual. If she wants to wear an Alexander McQueen dress or, you know, a Comme des Garçons sweater, I'm opposed to anybody who's telling people, you know, what you can and can't wear.
It was a litmus test in the past, though, interestingly. And First Ladies would proudly proclaim that they only wore American clothes, sometimes in support of tariff
But sometimes
laws.
it was a lie.
Yeah,
I mean-
yes.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi. I heard comments about affordable clothing that was worn by Mrs. Obama, and also the red dress that was worn by Nancy Reagan, and the implications in terms of accessibility to affordable clothing and the impact of this power red with the Republican Party. And I'm interested if you could speak a little bit more about the role of the First Lady and how her style can speak volumes to the climate of the nation through whether it's the selections they make based on the economy, just like the affordable clothing, or the politics of style, so to speak. I know we've talked a lot tonight about individual styles, but it's an interesting thing to think of how the First Lady represents the nation, you know, and where we are at the time that they're in the White House.
Well, I think that most First Ladies want to create an image which is not just about expressing them as an individual, but they understand that they're also expressing something about their husband's administration and the politics of that. So whether it's more or less egalitarian or more or less kind of an elite style, that's going to be played out in their clothing. It's not very often that they're going to make a very overtly political or partisan statement in their clothing, because most of the time none of us do that, and First Ladies probably also not very much. But I think that there is a role for emphasizing things that you believe in and that are going to express something about what you feel you and your husband and the administration are for, you know, so that if you want to express something about being a young, modern, dynamic, egalitarian regime, that you would be trying to use clothing in one way to say that.
And even with Mrs.
No,
Obama and childhood obesity, trying to, you know, bring attention to that, and the idea of being fit, you know, and, you know, having beautiful arms, and, you know, being very fit herself.
Yes.
And very active. I think that keeps it top of mind.
Yes.
You know, when you see her, this is, you know, a modern woman who's fit and active and is working to help the country be fit and active.
And I will add, and it's largely on your behalf, Tracy, the First Lady today and in the past will wear the work of current designers, and designers across disciplines, but in particular fashion designers are a kind of barometric gauge of our society and culture. They design in a context that's societal, cultural, historic, and political and economic. So by definition of what they're wearing, they're reflecting the times, in a manner of speaking.
Right.
And we actually have had a few First Ladies who have used clothes to make. Eleanor Roosevelt is an excellent example. Is ready-made clothing is more and more people are buying ready-made clothing, she does talk about how even busy women like her, a rich society woman, likes to buy off the rack. But she makes a point of cautioning against buying from sweatshops. You should buy union-made garments. Lou Hoover, not the first person you think of when you think of fashion, but the first lady to appear in Vogue, and someone who made best dress lists in Washington, D.C. during the Depression, makes a point of promoting cotton clothing to promote the Southern cotton industry. It tries a cotton evening gown. It didn't catch on, but gave it a shot. And proudly proclaimed this in the newspapers to try and use their clothes and their influence to make a really political or economic statement.
Okay, thank you.
And that goes way back. Napoleon urged Josephine to wear more silk because to help the poor silk weavers in Lyon who were all starving. Wear silk, bring silk back in fashion.
Yes, hi.
I was wondering if each of you had a favorite in terms of the different senses of style for each First Lady. So, like, which would be your favorite for each of you?
I have my favorite.
And I think we share that favorite. Yes.
Yeah. Mrs. O.
Yeah.
I really do like Mrs. Obama's style because it's so eclectic and because it's been so meaningful for so many people that I know in the industry, so exciting. I mean, you didn't know, I remember Isabel Toledo saying she didn't know that Mrs. Obama was going to wear her dress and coat at the first inauguration, and so it was just pandemonium at their house when they saw it.
I always say it's like asking a mother to choose between her children because they all come to me in the end. I have a sneaking love of Helen Taft's clothes. And after 15 minutes, it's my dress anyway. I watch the inauguration, and it's beautiful, and then I start thinking, don't step on my train.
Yeah. And then, of course, from a fashion perspective, it's always the next one.
What's coming?
Which might be the next first gentleman.
Now, that'll be interesting.
Question that the earlier person said, so if we do have a Madam President, will the Smithsonian have the tux that the first gentleman wears
former
to
directors
the
of the First
inaugural
Laddie. The Smithsonian's definition of First Lady, this sounds like a cop-out, and it's really not. The Smithsonian's definition of First Lady, as established by Mrs. Hughes and Mrs. James 100 years ago, was the mistress of the White House. And really, it's the person that fills the role of First Lady. So Harriet Lane, it isn't necessarily a wife. It's the person who fills this particular role. So we will actually have to wait and see how the White House, that presidency, deals with the role of First Lady and who will be serving that function. You're always going to be the host and hostess in your own home, but who will be taking on the roles traditionally played by the First Lady, and will that person be the First Lady? I am looking forward to putting that first inaugural woman's suit in the presidency exhibit. I think.
Hello. Thank you so much for this. And my question is, if we could talk more about how shoes and accessories factor into this, seeing as that's something we all care about, and it's a huge part of the fashion industry as well.
And it's that head-to-toe look. It's not just the apparel.
True.
Well, there have only been a few occasions when the accessories have really come to the fore. Notoriously, of course, with Mrs. Kennedy's pillbox hat, and conversely, when Jack Kennedy did not wear a hat, which put one more nail into the hat industry. But it was going out anyway. And with shoes, nowadays shoes are so important to us, and handbags. But historically, they really have been seen as just accessories to the main dress. What's changed so much, partly because I think we've become so much freer in terms of fashion, is now often the accessories are the main thing. A lot of people will dress now from the feet up. You probably have a lot of shoes and hats and accessories.
We have a reasonable amount of shoes and hats. Shoes more than hats, because we'll frequently get the entire ensemble, and because fewer people are wearing hats. Actually, my favorite shoes right now are the red shoes Mrs. Obama wore with the second inaugural gown, only because we still have a full-length picture of the white outfit, the first outfit up. And when you look at that, it's the beautiful train and some high heels. And the second dress has no train and a kitten heel. And so you sort of wonder, what did you, one night spent in that, and what did you, people, it's amazing how many people come, and that's one of the things they want to look at. And we're trying to put more shoes out now because it's such an interest.
Well, I think shoes are becoming more and more interesting in design and in our focus on them.
But we don't see First Lady handbags. Hardly ever.
Well,
a few evening bags.
A few evening bags.
No day bags. I think it's in the car or someone is holding it.
Yet they almost all have an inaugural purse made by Judith Lieber.
Oh.
We have a run of Judith Lieber purses. I think it just became a tradition at a certain point.
The two individuals who are standing will be our last two questions, okay? And we'll begin with you.
Thank you. So DC does not really have the reputation for being a very fashion-forward city. So my question is, with the emphasis on First Lady fashion and even to an extent members of Congress that are women and their fashion choices, what impact do you think that emphasis has on DC residents, lawyers, and lobbyists included, and being a little more savvy when it comes to their own style?
Can I just jump in and say I wish it had an impact? Truly.
We're trying.
I think people need to break out of the box. I think it's a very conservative town because of the politics, I guess, and everyone is aligned and everyone is in a certain camp, and that camp dresses the same. But I think, being individual and kind of standing for self is equally important, and it would be great to see people express themselves.
Anything to add? Hi.
Hi. My question goes back to Jackie Kennedy and just the impact she had on fashion. How much of that impact do you think was due to technology evolving and television becoming such a main impact?
I think that was an important factor in it because she could be covered so extensively. There will be photographs and televisions. But celebrity is something that technology can elaborate celebrity, but it doesn't cause celebrity. So I think that even had she lived earlier, she probably would have had a very powerful impact because she was so much into high style and into using the high style, I think quite self-consciously and intelligently as a way of trying to promote Jack's presidency as being very modern, very young, etc. And I think the very chic clothes helped with that. There was nothing old-fashioned about it.
There's also there's every few first ladies just take the public imagination. Jacqueline Kennedy is Frances Cleveland, and the Jacqueline Kennedy of the 19th century. It's the same sort of just, this is the person the public looks at and can't get enough of, and that was a first lady, without that many cameras. But she just becomes a fixture for America, and no matter what she's doing, what she's wearing, you want to know more. Mrs. Cleveland, Mrs. Kennedy, Mrs. Obama is someone that just this public seized on them. And
celebrity's a strange thing, and fashion celebrities in particular, it's an amazing, people will just identify, whether or not in fact they look anything like the person. I remember when they had the wonderful Jackie Kennedy show at the Costume Institute, and there were lines and lines of adoring people wearing baggy shorts and fanny packs and flip-flops, and you thought, you're going to worship at her shrine and wearing that?
That's a very good question. Lisa Kathleen Graddy, Valerie Steele, Tracy Reese, thank you so very, very much. And thank all of you. Thank you. I hope we learned a lot tonight. I certainly know we had a lot of fun. Yes, so thank you. And let's make the world look better.
It starts with you.
That's right. Thank you so very much.